Hello, everyone. This is a bit of a different format than you're used to, and we're still figuring. I'm still figuring all that out. Um, but I've introduced my friend Darian here to talk about the subject of biblical canon because biblical canon is a very important subject since it really is determining what we should be believing. And me, as more of a theologian type of just, hey, here's what the Bible says. Darian's a lot better at apologetics. So, um, so Darian, uh,
Yeah.
why would you say that the topic of biblical canon is important?
As you said before, so this is a question of what books should we believe are going to be authoritative for our lives. So as Christians, we're called to seek the truth, and so we can't just believe what anybody says. So they need to have some kind of credibility. So I guess it's a question of what's credible. What book can I trust is giving me accurate information about God, which of course is there could be no more important question. I mean, who is God really? Who is God? What is He really like? So it's arguably one of the most important questions in theology and apologetics, whatever you want to call it. Because if we don't know the accurate picture of Jesus or God, how can we really worship them?
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. I mean, we have to understand who he is in order to, be able to follow him. So then how would you define the concept of biblical canon?
Yeah, so as we talked about a little bit before, so with the biblical canon, it's basically a question of what books are credible, what books are, describing God or Jesus, or events in the past, whatever. What books are describing them accurately? What books are true? So for the case of historical books, obviously, then the case would just be: are these books correct or not? Was Hitler the leader of of Germany during World War II? Stuff like that. Or then you have more theological treatises, kind of like Paul's letters, or the Gospel or stuff like that, which it's more based on content, which is a little bit harder to determine. But anyway, basic question of determining which is what books are right and good to study. So, how am I going to define the biblical canon? I think the best approach, as always, is leaving it up to the church, which I'm going to explain what that means. So up until this point in history, the church has agreed on 66 books of the Bible, where if you open any Bible, you're going to see these 66 books. It starts with the first 5 books, the Pentateuch, going all the way to Revelation. Every church agrees with this. And so we can trust these books. The church everywhere has agreed with it. The only difference is that there are some churches that think that there are a few extra books we should add, which I think that's up to the individual church. If they truly think that it's inspired, then that's up to them. There's no harm, I don't think, in that, because we all agree on the basic canon. Now, since you did ask me my opinion about some of these extra books, which I'm just going to describe the Roman Catholic books, so there are more. So the Roman Catholic canon is the same 66 books as ours, but they add a few extra, such as Tobit or Judith or First and Second Maccabees, etc. Though other churches also add Third and Fourth Maccabees, some additional Psalms, etc. There's a lot of these extra books out there. But let's just focus on the Roman Catholic canon, which is, Tobit, Judith, etc. In my personal opinion, I don't think that they're inspired, or I don't think they belong in the canon. Mostly because there's a lot of historical errors in these books. If they get the historical information wrong, I don't see a real good reason to trust the theological stuff. For example, in the book of Judith, it says in just the first few verses, it says, King Nebuchadnezzar, who is the king of the Assyrians. Well, that's not right. Nebuchadnezzar is the king of the Babylonians. So that's just a blatant error right in the first few verses. There are plenty of websites out there that are dedicated to defending these books. Maybe if maybe they're right. I mean, I personally find them incorrect. But people have tried to defend these books, and if they're really convinced that they should be in the canon, that's fine. The information within a lot of these books isn't too much different from what's in the Bible. So even if we were to add them in the canon, not much would change anyway. But that's just my opinion. I personally don't think we need them. Yeah, that's what I have to say about the biblical canon, defining it.
Okay. And one common idea that comes with biblical canon is that they were divinely inspired.
Yeah.
So what is a way of hoping determine whether something is really divinely inspired or not?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So as I mentioned before, I said how I think it's good that for a lot of churches to decide what books they what books they think are canon or not. The same coherent message. In the books that we already have in the Bible, using these as an example. But even if we're going to go back in time and think of before we had the whole canon, many of these books are unified in their picture of God. Presenting God as a good and just God, a God that loves people, a God that wants to help us and save us from our sin problem, which is prevalent throughout the whole Bible. It's characteristics like this same message that seems to transcend culture and transcend time. It gives us a good indication, like, okay, we can trust this book. God is presented, the same in this book as in this book. Apart from that characteristic, there's not really too much more that we can definitively say, like, this is definitely inspired, except there's one or two others we're going to talk about which are more maybe not as objective. The first one is prophecy. Many books in the Bible have prophecies that we can at least somewhat verify. Like in Isaiah, there's many prophecies about Jesus, which some people would debate, but generally accepted, at least by Christian scholars. And so there's prophecy. If this prophecy is correct, then this author has a history of getting these prophecies right. Then we can probably trust that this person knows God. God is speaking to them. We can trust what they have to write. So if we can verify their prophecy, then we have no reason to doubt that their writings are accurately describing God for us. The other thing is similar to prophecy, but it's like apostleship. So after the age of the prophets has ended and we go to the New Testament, we don't really have prophets anymore, at least not in the same sense. So when we read through Peter or Paul, we don't really see them giving any prophecies, at least not any specific ones. Maybe Paul will say that in the end times, people will be evil and disobedient, but that's not really a specific prophecy. You can't really verify that it's happened now. So we're going to look at apostleship. So apostleship, which is similar to prophecy, but these are people that have been authorized by Jesus to teach his word. And so they just have an air of credibility. Like these people have been with Jesus, knew Jesus, had access to his teachings, etc. So anything they write is trustworthy. If Jesus is true and what he has to say is true, then surely what these teachers are sharing, which is Jesus' words, are also true. So those are the three major criteria. Apart from that, like other books like Hebrews that don't really fall into any of those categories I listed before, where there's not really prophecy in it. It's not we can't even really verify an apostle wrote it, etc. A lot of times it's just we look through the message of it, and churches have decided ultimately they said we think this book is good and we should add it. And so I think that's that's about it for the criteria. That's about it for the criteria.
All right, and I missed you a little bit there in the early, but my internet decided to just completely shut off and come back on. So I missed a little bit of that, but I got most of it, I think.
You need me to re-say anything, or? or you have any questions on what I said so far? Or
on what you said so far, no, but I do have more questions to ask you though.
Yeah, let's keep going.
So you've mentioned, congregation to congregation should determine their own canon. So
yeah.
Who in a congregation should determine that?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think maybe instead of each congregation, more as like I want to say just a church as a whole. Like when you have the Roman Catholic Church, think how big that is and how many small congregations that encompasses. The church as a whole has just decided, okay, we're gonna have this canon, and Protestant churches, we're gonna have this canon, etc. So when it comes to each individual person, I think it's if anybody, if we're talking about individuals, anyone that's an elder or at least somewhat maybe well read, like they've read these books and they're comparing it with books that have already been accepted. This question, of course, brings up if we should still be adding to the biblical canon, which we can cover in a little bit. But just to stay focused on your question, yeah, I would think it would just be elders. And then for a bigger church like the Roman Catholic Church, if there was truly a debate, should this book be in the canon or not, they could just get elders from different churches, and then they could just discuss the pros and cons, etc.
Okay. So
yeah.
Say that they have decided something to be canon, right?
Okay.
And you personally disagree with them. Should you just submit to what they say, or should you?
Mm-hmm. I personally think I would personally say yes, that we should submit. In Christianity, we have a history of like I said, we're talking about the apostles before. Apostles were meant to be authoritative teachers who knew what Jesus was saying. Going forward into the modern world, we also have elders who I think we should still give them that air of credibility. That doesn't mean we have to believe everything they say. But if the church as a whole has decided, let's add this book, and maybe I personally don't agree with it, that shouldn't stop me from worshiping with this church, because any book that they add is going to be similar to the books we already have. So the message of Christianity wouldn't be changing. If it did change at all, it would be an extremely small change. So it shouldn't really bother me, even if I did think like, hey, this book isn't canon. Because the message of Christianity is still going to be the same, ultimately.
Also, and this is not something we've discussed yet.
Yeah.
So there is a common thing that people say that, the Bible is just written by human beings.
Yeah.
What is your response to that?
I definitely think that, yes, of course, God used human writers to aid in the quest of writing the Bible. But to say it's purely a human invention is, I think, obviously false. Because we talked about before, the Bible isn't just people sharing their opinions. It comes from credible sources. Like I said, first, with prophecy, if an individual is giving prophecies and they're coming true, surely what they have to say about God is true. With a track record like that, there's really no way you would be mistaken then. Obviously God is speaking to you. And then when we get forward later in history with the New Testament, with apostleship, the people that are teaching us, the people that are telling us who Jesus was, they were Jesus' closest associates and people that Jesus trained. So these books are not just people's opinions. They come from a credible source. And of course we can trust Jesus because of some of the miracles attributed to his life, the resurrection, and other physical things like that, where we can verify, like, okay, what Jesus has to say isn't just human opinion, which is very important. Where some of these later books, like the Gospel of Thomas, I just think there's a lot of things that have to be doubted. Like a lot of teachings that we find therein are just one in blatant contrast to what we see about Jesus and other writings that have been accepted by the church. Like one of the writings in the Gospel of Thomas literally says it says that Jesus says that he will make Mary a man so that she can enter the kingdom of heaven. It's every woman needs to become a man to enter the kingdom of heaven. It's like, where did that come from? It's like we don't see that in any other real writings about Jesus. It's like, is that really credible? Not really. And there's a lot of other things about the history of this writing, how, like I said, wasn't really accepted by the church at large. It's questionable if Thomas even wrote it. He probably didn't. And other stuff like that leads us to say, no, this is just human opinion. Other books, very credible, much more trustworthy. They have the prophecy/miracles or credibility that Jesus gave them to write it. So no, it wouldn't just be a human invention. We never want to mitigate the fact that yes, humans did. God used humans and their various cultural backgrounds to explain himself. That's why when you read the Old Testament, there's a lot of cultural things you need to understand, because God is going to explain his teachings to us in a way we can understand. When God is describing something that we can't see, spirits, heaven, stuff like that, he has to use something we do know so we can understand it. So we don't want to take away that part of it. Like, yes, God does use what we can understand, but that doesn't mean that the Bible is just human opinion, that God had nothing to do with it at all, etc.
Okay, yeah. And so, would you say that the Bible is absolutely trustworthy?
Yeah, of course, I would personally. There's of course so much scholarly literature about other contradictions in the Bible. Looking at some of the Old Testament, is this historical event true? Looking at the New Testament, way too much to go into today. Briefly, I'm convinced that it's trustworthy. I haven't really found any good reason to see any true errors in the Bible. I find the authority of it very credible, especially the New Testament with the apostles, which of course it all hinges on Jesus. If we can trust Jesus, then we can trust the apostles as well, because we have reason to trust that they transmitted from him his teachings accurately. So it's really a question of Jesus is trustworthy, and I would say yes, based on my study.
Yeah. And so, we're getting towards the end of this.
Yeah.
And I just want to ask you more of a theological question at this point.
Yeah.
So since the Bible is trustworthy, since it's definitely has some basis in truth and being inspired by God, rather than just being a human product, and we can reliably trust what the Bible says. So how do you think that should influence our lives?
If we can trust the Bible, then we ought to read it. And if this is a book that's truly from God, we shouldn't just read it, but we need to read it often and familiarize ourselves with what God has been is trying to teach us about himself. It's really easy at times to let our own human experience to dictate what we believe about God. I go to the store and someone curses at me and says, "Oh, you need to stay 6 feet away from me, coronavirus, whatever, you're a horrible person," which has happened to my mom a few times.
Really?
You just kind of have this experience and you start to really hate people, and you think, wow, I'm not going to try to help people or love people. People just suck. Well, of course, that's not what we find in the Bible. The Bible says that, yes, at times life is difficult. Yes, sometimes people do things to us that we don't deserve, but that doesn't mean we should just accept that and be like, yeah, I'm not going to love anybody. The Bible tells us to the contrary. We should love people like this because that's exactly what God has done to us. Even though we don't deserve his love, he still loves us. And other things like that. Maybe we're praying and we feel like God's not answering, and we're just going to let our own opinions influence us about God and say, yeah, God's not really listening. Maybe there isn't a God at all, or if he is real, he doesn't care about me. Where all these things are answered in the Bible, and if we can trust the Bible, that when it seems like God's not answering us, we should instead look to what the Bible has to say about this. No, it's not that God isn't answering you, but sometimes you have to wait. Sometimes suffering comes from God, and we need to just endure. So to summarize, we need to trust the Bible, and if we can trust the Bible, then we need to continuously read it and form our ideas about God based on what it says, not based on our own opinions about God. There is one thing I wanted to add, a question that you didn't ask, but I wanted to address real quick. Is that okay?
Yeah, go ahead.
A question I think is important, which I alluded to, is this idea of canon today. Should we add any books to the canon today? Is the canon closed? Should we trust? Should we maybe go back and reevaluate books that we've already had? Is it possible we can look at a book like Matthew and be like, after all this research, I decide maybe Matthew wasn't canon after all, and we should get rid of it. So let's address this kind of big question just briefly. So the first question, should we maybe reevaluate the canon and remove stuff that we've already had, etc.? I want to say no. Looking at the canon, looking at the 66 books that we've had, these have been books that have been trusted by the church for the past 2,000 years. Books in the Old Testament have been trusted even longer. I see really no reason to remove any of these books. If there was anything wrong with these books by now, we would have they would not have survived up to this day. The only question of if we should remove them would then have to do with are there historical errors in these books, which based on my research I would say no. So I can't really see any reason to say we should get rid of books in the canon unless, like I said, we somehow could prove that there's historical error. But there's, in my opinion, not really a lot of room to do that. And then the second question, should we maybe add any books to the canon? Maybe a famous writer like Spurgeon or C.S. Lewis or John Piper or John MacArthur. They write a great book and we're like, this book is so good. Should we add a book like that into the Bible? And is the canon closed is the subsequent question. I think I will leave this up to every church to decide. I think in general, most churches would say the canon is closed, but maybe some churches allow for prophecy. Where let's say there's a prophet that wants to say something on God's behalf. Some churches are okay with that. But I don't think any church is adding new books to the canon because at this point in the game, while there are many good books out there, I mean, John MacArthur, Spurgeon, C.S. Lewis, great Christian thinkers, we should never add these books to the Bible, though, because anything they have to say therein is they're not saying anything that isn't already included in the Bible. And when it comes to teachings about God, we want to go to a credible source. While they're credible thinkers, where they're getting their theology from is just from books of the Bible anyway. So adding new books based on their thoughts would just be redundant. While they're good to read, that doesn't mean that they're trustworthy in every point. So I would say I think it's personally closed, and most churches would agree with me, where the only difference was that some churches would accept prophecy, but they wouldn't write down this prophet's sayings and put it in the Bible. Yeah, so that's pretty much all I wanted to say.
And to kind of help summarize what you were just saying, make sure I also understand what you're saying as well. Is pretty much that these writers like C.S. Lewis and all that, and I'm like a huge fan of C.S. Lewis, so yeah. But he is what would be considered a secondary source, rather than the Bible being a primary source. And for like those of us that are in college, we always should be looking for the primary source rather than the secondary. We should be pretty much getting it from the camel's mouth. I feel like I just said that metaphor wrong, but you get my point.
No, you're right. Yeah. Well, it's like you said. It's like, well, C.S. Lewis is just taking his teaching from the Bible anyway. So why would we go to him instead of just go to the Bible? So it's like, yeah.
So, is there anything you would like to say to anyone that may be watching?
No, I think that's about it. I just think that it was important to finish my thought about is the canon still open today? Because at first I had left that a little vague. I left that a little vague, and hopefully I clarified that now. Yeah.
Well, it's been a pleasure being able to.
There is one thing I wanted to say that I just thought about. So when it comes to the canon, there's one idea that's been pretty popular, where they say that the Old Testament was determined by Jesus, and then Jesus gave the Old Testament canon to the apostles. And then the church never debated what books should go in the canon. This is a view that has been changing a little bit. This idea that Jesus gave people a canon. I thought it was important to bring this out is because sometimes people get a little discouraged in their faith, where they might say, well, what do you mean Jesus didn't give us an Old Testament canon? Are you trying to tell me that the Old Testament canon was just decided over time? And I would say yes, it was. That's not a bad thing, though. That doesn't take away the divine inspiration of the Bible. The fact that sometimes there have been some New Testament books that have been debated over the years as well, not just Old Testament books like Second Peter or Hebrews or Revelation. But I don't think that's ever a bad thing, because it shows that the church is thinking, that we don't just blindly accept whatever comes to us. And that's what I think is always a good thing. I don't think that we should look at it and say, oh no, that's not good, that the church wasn't in a complete agreement immediately. Like I said, it shows the church is thinking, and it's I think a good thing. So even if they did somehow receive a closed canon from Jesus, maybe Jesus told them every single book that was in the Old Testament, which I don't think he did personally, but if he somehow did, then either way, it doesn't matter. If he did, then woohoo, then we know what books for certain. If not, I mean, the church is in agreement pretty much at this point anyway, except for maybe a few books here and there. But in general, the core is agreed upon. We shouldn't worry. Yeah.
And I've also heard something that sounds very similar to what you're saying as well. That one of the reasons why we have the Old Testament canon that we have is because a lot of it is referenced in the New Testament.
Yeah, about that. Yeah, certainly Jesus made references to a lot of them, so that's how we can trust that a lot of them. Okay, yeah, we should trust it. Of course, Jesus didn't refer to every single book, but he referred to a great deal of them. And so we can take heart in that, yes, we're on the right track with trusting these books. Yeah.
Yeah. So if you have nothing else to say.
Yeah, now I have nothing else to say. I'm sorry. Yeah, I'm long-winded sometimes.
Good. I'm always up for some more learning. I am.
Yeah.
But it's been an honor having you be able to sit down and talk with me about this, because you were by far much more in the leaning of an apologist than I am.
Thanks.
Yeah, all I know is how to say, here's what the Bible says. That's about my entire skill set. So.
The only thing I think there is to say is I don't think I introduced myself at all, so I could just briefly do that. My name's Darian. I go to school with MacU with James as well. So yeah, that's pretty much all I had to say about introducing myself.